evening and welcome to the Learning Development Specialist Group. My name is Kevin Streeter and I'm chair of the group, and delighted to welcome you tonight to Creating Employable Graduates, New Approaches to University Accreditation. And joined this evening by two special guests. I've got Professor Alastair Irons, who's Vice President of BCS Academy of Computing, and Dr. David Bowers from the Open University. And we'll let them introduce themselves a bit more when we get to their sections, but I'm going to do a brief introduction while everyone's joining. Just a reminder, we are recording, so if you don't want to be on the recording, then please either leave or just not raise any questions. Please put your questions into chat. I will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the talk tonight, so put your questions there and I'll be moderating Q&A at the end, and we are underway. So just to begin with, for people that haven't joined a Learning Development Specialist Group meeting before, this group is for anyone that is involved in the development, delivery or management of learning to IT and communications professionals and users. So hopefully you'll find yourself aligned to one of those groups somewhere. But to give you a broader idea, about 18% of our group are aligned with IT end user training, about 18% from the IT professional skills world, which are things like project management, service management and so on. 16% from IT technical training, so this is your product training, your deep technical product skills. About the same from the university and education sector, and then the remaining third are people who are just generally interested in IT learning and development and skills topics. And so a very broad audience, but everyone's very welcome to the group. Couple of reminders, we have our own page on the BCS website for the specialist group. All our events are announced on the website, and just if you want to have a look at any of the past events, we also have a YouTube channel in the BCS member group's YouTube area. We've got the last 2 years worth of online events archived on there, and a few days time this event will also be posted to the playlist. I always have to put a quick plug in for the book that we were part of, Technical Training Management. Lots of useful content in there about all aspects of learning, from creating content, delivering content, running a training business, lots of different things in there. So if you haven't had a look at it, go and have a look at the BCS bookshop and take a look at the book and hopefully buy a copy. And our upcoming events, October the 19th is our AGM, and we are going to be looking, we've got a speaker coming to talk about how software training needs to be more focused on experiences. And then in November, we're going to have a session that I'm going to lead on best practice in recording CPD. So we did a CPD event beginning of the year. So we're going to wrap the year up with another one on CPD. And then we were due to join CEDMA, the Computer Education Management Association, for a live event in November. Unfortunately, that's been postponed to March. So we're now looking to join them on March 21st to do a hybrid event. So you can either join us in person or watch it online. And we will provide more details as soon as they're available. And finally, if you want to keep in touch with us, then please join us either by following us on Twitter. We've got lots of followers. I think the numbers are constantly going up, and please help advertise the group and let more people know that we're here and the events that we're running. And just to finish my introduction, just want to go back to where's today's topic come from. It came from the Shadbolt review back in 2016, that it would be beneficial, it would benefit all stakeholders, including graduates, if employment outcomes and employability to become a more central part of accrediting a degree programme. That was nearly 5 years ago. So where are we today? So delighted to welcome two speakers who know this subject well. And we're going to start with Professor Alastair Irons, who's been leading the work on the BCS accreditation update. And then we'll come to Dr. David Bowes, who has been leading the work on the Institute of Coding Accreditation Board. And so thank you both for joining us tonight. And Alastair, I'll do a quick switch over to your slides and welcome. If I can.
So this is why I'm glad you're doing it, Kevin, and not me.
That should be the right slides now, Alastair.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks awful much, Kevin. Thanks for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. I hope they find this an interesting talk. Forgive me if I go into the fine detail. It's something that's very close to my heart, and it's, you know, as you'll see as we go through the discussion, both on what I'm going to say and what I know David will say, there's an interesting lexicon around accreditation, and indeed it's a very small world. And then I also sit on David's group with because I was a member of the IOC, and you know, and David sits on AAC, he sits on accreditation panels and has been to AAC, and you know, it is a small world. So we'll see that. If you could flip this over to the next slide, please, Cam. So what I'd like to talk about in a brief time, and you know, trying to do this in 20 minutes is perhaps a folly, because we could talk forever about it. And if folks are interested, I'm more than happy to go back and you know, do another session, either you know, with this group or whichever group. We're really trying to get people involved in accreditation and to really promote the value. And interesting that Kevin mentioned the Shadbolt review, and you know, both David and I were involved in that in various different workshops, and you know, Shadbolt came out with some really interesting observations, but that's what they really were, and nobody kind of did anything with them. So that's very nice, that's lovely, and part of the reason we are where we are today is that, you know, we're trying to do something much more proactive and be action led. So I'll come to that at the end of my talk, and you'll see that one thing that Shadbolt didn't do was really push at the PSRBs, and what we've done in this particular review, and we're only a third of the way through it, is get the BCS executive to buy into things, and so I'll come to that later. So really want to talk a little bit about accreditation from the BCS perspective, look at the environment of accreditation, and there's will be some crossover between what I say and what David says, but in the main, really share with you the progress that we are underway at the moment, looking at what we mean by a degree of accreditation and the processes and procedures associated with that, and indeed the value associated with that. Look at some of the challenges, because there are some interesting challenges. Not least the fact that accreditation is used in so many different ways, but it's, you know, there's some interesting circles that need to be squared, and you know, can't quite be. And then I'll give you a timeline of where we are with the accreditation review. Thanks, Kevin. We go on to the next one. So where to start? Who's involved in this? Who cares? Well, you know, hopefully lots of people care, but there are a lot of stakeholders. So the BCS is one of the professional bodies in the UK, and indeed globally. We've got members in 150 countries across the world. Indeed, we accredit programs in different countries, in South Africa and Ireland and Greece, and really interesting. If we have time, I'll some interesting feedback around how that accreditation process is viewed overseas compared to the UK. The computer science schools, departments are obviously interested in this, but there's the first issue. Some are more interested than others, and some engage with it in different ways, and some indeed resent the whole process. University management are potentially interested. Accreditation could be on the league table scores, and so there's an interest there. If accreditation is lost or taken away for any reason, then it becomes a reportable incident to the Office for Students. So university management become interested there. We would hope that students are interested, and you know they're starting on a journey of employment, and because it speaks to Shadbolt Review and how we get them to think about their careers, think about the impact of computing and computer science, both in terms of business and industry, but also and perhaps more importantly on society. And so really pushing the professional and ethical side of things for students. There's also our market, and we don't do this well at all. I don't think any of the PSRBs in the UK do this particularly well, is engage prospective students and say what really get the value of the accredited program to folks who are applying for the degrees. There are international students, interestingly, have a different view and will talk about and look for accreditation of degrees. There are, of course, all sorts of external groups interested in this. The QAA, we're in the process of redoing the QAA benchmark for computing at the moment, and one of the things that accreditation does is try to show that that any provision in a university maps against the QAA benchmark. The Office for Students, I mentioned already, starting to be really interested in that whole PSRB thing, and potentially funders are like keeping an eye on this. And the people that we really want to engage as stakeholders, and one of the big problems around both the Shadbolt and taking on the Shadbolt Review outcomes, but also in the whole process of accredited degree programs, is getting employers to buy into them. Then manifests itself into a much bigger thing around the shortage of digital skills, shortage of computing skills, and employers taking people from geography, English, basket weaving in to do computer science programming jobs. And so there's a really interesting bit of the environment there. Do a couple of afternoons CPD and you'll be able to program. That's great. And so there's some strange views from a number of employers about what it means to come in to the computer science discipline. Thanks, Kevin. Excuse me. So I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail, because there are you can get access to this detail on the BCS website, but HEI accreditations are around benchmark for standards. It shows that university courses, rather than individual students, form the basis to go on to chartered status, either CITP or CEng. You see that I'm starting to pick in some of the issues here. They're looking at specific learning outcomes and map those against the educational quality associated with the degree. Again, an interesting point there. Because of the fact that we're looking at courses in BCS accreditation rather than individuals, they're concerned with minimums. So it's what that guaranteeing that a student who passes a degree, whether it's a third class degree or a first class honours, that they demonstrate the learning that it says is going to be done in that programme. And that is something that is helps to confuse the situation. It's also, and why I got involved in this in the first place, however many years ago, I was actually doing the BCS submission I was working at Northumbria at the time, and I thought, I quite like this. It's a nice challenge. It actually helped in my career progression and the like. I said, oh, I'd quite like to look at what the lens is like from the other side of the table. And that's why I got involved with accreditation and that work. But it's really about peers talking to each other, trying to work together to pick at issues and then enhance the approach of the HEI. Now, this is very different to what it was like when I first started in this space. It used to be really quite confrontational, and those of you who are old enough will remember the way that the quality assurance used to be done externally. CCA, CNA, and like in the community, they really ripped you to shreds. And the BCS accreditation was a wee bit like that. Thankfully, over the last 10-15 years, we've moved away from that. We've really stopped any accreditation. The chairs are all trained in a particular way. The panels are trained in a particular way to be supportive, and that I think is something that's really important to know. Thanks, Kip. There's a lot of things, and when you know, and I'll talk about why I started this review in a second. But we do a lot of things right, not just the BCS. Everybody that's involved in accreditation. It's a really interesting place to be. So looking at that development and engagement, raising standards, getting like bringing in a whole set of different variables. For example, in computer science, the solar cord, the Washington Accord, AHEP, that I'll come back to in a second, so that there's an expectation that graduates across the world from computer and computer science degrees are at a particular level, which is going to help the mobility of students. And two institutions that we accredit in South Africa, they have as one of their main drivers for using BCS accreditation that mobility of their students. There's also a piece around the QAA benchmark and ensuring the curricula is relevant, you know, things like cybersecurity, teamwork, and professional environment, as well as all the things that you would expect a computer science graduate to do, you know, around networking, around programming, around, you know, databases, around AI, you know, that whole set of things are in that mix. The other things around accreditation are around disseminating good practice. And there's some fantastic, you know, again, when I'm out on accreditation visits, I learn so much more, you know, about what's going on and what's good practice, and we seek to disseminate that so that the whole community gets a benefit from it. And then, of course, trying to bring in industrial relevance. We always have an industrialist on the panel, and then, you know, thinking about how we take in, for example, placements and work experience. Thanks, Ken. We're looking for a whole set of things, and most of them I've mentioned at the moment already. They're up to date. There's a program design's gone in. There's a whole process for internal review annually and quinquennially. The map against the benchmark. They use the external examiners appropriately. As an aside, the whole external examiner thing is up in the air a wee bit, but thankfully that's not something that we need to worry about just this evening. Look at that whole program learning outcome and how that maps against the benchmark, and then, of course, the bit that you would expect, that there's enough computing in it. And this becomes interesting when we were on joint degrees, you know, you're computing business, computing maths, and the like. And when in those joint degrees, there's an expectation that there's 2/3 of the program is around computing. Thanks. There are, and this is where it starts to get interestingly complex, a whole set of other bodies that use accreditation in the higher education context. So in computer science, as our sister institute, the IET, also accredit computer science programs. They align to AHEP in the same way that we do, but they do things slightly differently. Adds to the confusion. There are those of you who are doing degree apprenticeships will know tech partnership degrees, now aligned to Tech UK. They used to do that still do the ITMB and have a series of products. They claim to be able to do accreditation and do things very differently. At my institution, I've got degree apprentice programs. I got a nice little letter recently saying that gold standard accreditation. That's very nice. Love that. The Institute of Coding, David and I were part of the 35 University Consortium and did a whole sort of really interesting work. And Dave will share with you later this evening the work that the IOC did or just continuing to do around accreditation at a different level, and you're looking at things in a different way. There are also a whole series of accreditations that are coming out that are subject specialisms, so in security and computer forensics and computer games, and all claiming to have the accreditation. The certification and accreditation at a smaller level with Microsoft, Cisco, ISC Squared, you name it. The BCS indeed confuses the picture by offering accreditation like RIT Tech to certify placements. There's also a whole series of new opportunities around accreditation and micro-credentials, micro-accreditation, and that market is going to explode and is going to make the picture even more complex. And of course, we've got Equani from a European perspective. Thanks, Kev. I'll try and speed up a bit, to such an extent that these are just some other players that are really interested in accreditation. So I'm not going to go into that at the moment, but it just shows that complexity of the environment. Thank you. So, why did we start off a review of accreditation? Well, there are, as I've started to illustrate, a whole set of challenges and dichotomies around what we're trying to do. Some of the computer science community is quite antagonistic about accreditation. Actually, they're quite antagonistic about the BCS, if I'm perfectly honest. Last summer, one of the HEIs, in fact it was Durham, for reasons that were more to do with pragmatics in what Durham were going through in terms of change, withdrew from accreditation, and that then kicked off a whole set of discussions. Discussion is the right word? It's as good a word as we're going to use, on the CPHC website, and it got to a point, it was getting to the situation where I couldn't keep quiet. My first reaction was let them like say what they want to say, but it got to a point to say, look, enough already. If there's a problem, talk to me about it and we'll do something about it. None of them took up the offer to talk to me about it, interestingly, but I decided to do something about it anyway. Come back to that in a second. There are things around the meaning of accreditation, as I've talked about. It can be a big ask. One of the things we've tried to do over the last 10 years is reduce the amount of documentation that's been required. I'll go back to the first time I did it. I had a DHL van to myself, taking 6 big crates of documentation down to Swindon. We've moved way away from that. There's an interesting challenge around CITP and CEng and what those mean and what those mean to people. The external environment we can't ignore. The employers is something to consider, and then there's actually getting this to mean something for professionalism of our industry. Thanks, yeah. So what do we do? Initiated a review, set up a steering group. My friend and colleague Paul Martinenko, I got to be independent chair. Paul's a past president of the BCS. We took a number of people from industry, from blue chip industries, from new industries, from SMEs, to get that employer view, and a range of academics with different perspectives about accreditation. Indeed, 1 or 2 people that were quite vocal about accreditation being a problem. Then we did a big exercise around gathering data, trying to get data from employers. Not the easiest thing to do. Talked to various different HEIs. We did a big survey that went out to all HEIs. We took a group of HEIs that were pro accreditation, if you like. We had a group of HEIs who were, we'll call them naysayers, and then our international partners in accreditation. We talked to students and we've talked to other PSRBs. We of course had to then try and align with other initiatives. And here's the big difference about what we're doing at the minute and how the BCS reacted to Shadbolt is that we put a paper with recommendations to BCS Executive in July. Thanks. So just in a little bit more detail about what we've done, about the data that we've gathered around how we've actually done things. And we were quite brutal at the outset. Said, well, actually, do we want to do accreditation? If it's such a pain in the neck, if it's, you know, if there's such a kick against it, why do it? Well, why bother? And there was an interesting philosophical debate about that. And we really believe that if the BCS is going to be the learned society for computing, computer science, then it should be involved in accreditation. So do we say the same? Do we create something completely new? And where we ended up was actually, let's take the good bits and tweak around the issues and get this sorted. And then, as I say, in July we put a report with a set of recommendations to BCS Executive. Thank you. So what we were seeking to do was create a new accreditation process and program. That's in progress and keeping going on. AHEP 4, many of you will know, is out, and we are expected to align with that by the end of the year. It's actually a much better document than AHEP 3, and there are 18 learning outcomes rather than the 30 odd, and they're in reasonably learning outcome-ish type speak, so you can say yes, that can be met, whereas it wasn't the case with AHEP 3 or indeed the earlier AHEP versions. But it's still tricky trying to work out what on earth we do with that. We presented the recommendations. We got a formal response from the BCS Executive, and we might have said, well, that's it, done. Jobs are good. But there's a phase 2 that we're just initiating. There's really probably, if I'm honest with myself, going to be a phase 3 because this is a much bigger thing than even I imagined when I started off on it. We need to, of course, keep the engineering council on board because we're taking CE on the license, so we can't just do completely what we want. And of course, we're getting to the BCS trustees involved, and indeed trying to involve BCS Council, the Office of Presidents for the BCS, and trying to really push this, which is, you know, there's a hearts and minds piece here. Okay, thanks. So the recommendations, 3 main ones. One, to revise accreditation to embrace AHEP 4, you know, fairly obvious. Second one, to get the BCS, and it starts to become slightly different, to engage all stakeholders in the purpose and value of accreditation. And the BCS is expected to build and manage the relationships with academics and students around the value of accreditation and indeed the value of BCS. So, thank you. The BCS came back, and I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised. And colleagues in the steering group were very pleased. So for the first time ever, you might think this is quite a bizarre thing to say, that the BCS have recognised accreditation of HE programs as a key BCS product. Now that, when you say it quickly, you think, well, that's fine, but it's actually a huge major step and a huge major step forward. BCS are also going to appoint a product manager for accreditation. Again, a huge step forward in taking the whole thing seriously. They've got an executive owner that sits on the BC executive that has responsibility for accreditation. Again, that was lacking, that was missing. of course, the BCS then are going to help operationalise the transformation that you have for. So I guess the big thing that's come out of it is that the BCS are going, you know what, we're going to take this seriously. It's never going to be a huge money-making thing, but it links into so many of the different aspects of computing, computer science, not least the professionalism, the link to society, but also pragmatically to membership. Because if we get every graduate from computer science to become a member of the BCS, and I've said they should have 2 years free membership, but okay, that's a different story again for a different day. After they graduate, they should also have free membership on the students. There's 25,000 potential members coming in to the BCS every year. It doesn't, anyway. And I'm really pleased that Holly Holly Porter, who's the head of membership, is also a BCS executive owner for accreditation, and that's actually a huge step forward. So, okay, thanks. I'm nearly there. Sorry, David. So just to sort of finish, what we're trying to do is get the value of accreditation sorted. We're hoping to make sure that the processes and procedures are acceptable to everybody. We want a universal understanding of accreditation. We want to have our hearts and minds peace. This links into BCS reputation, and as I mentioned, it's got an impact on BCS membership. So apologies for going over my 20 minutes, but I think that's us. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Alastair. So if we can switch over to David, I will try and make you presenter. And the Institute of Coding. So David, take it away.
You can actually see the slides, can you? Because
yep.
The fold back doesn't show that. Okay, I could introduce myself. I've been for the past 3 years spending quite a lot of time running a major work stream in the Institute of Coding, a large project, 35 universities, over 100 employers, £20 million match funding from the Office for Students. And one of the things they were trying to do was to get us to come up with a better way of accrediting graduates. This was a collaboration in the end, not only between the Institute of Coding and run by this particular one, run by the Open University, where I'm an academic. You also had professional members of BCS involved and the SOFIA Foundation. What we're trying to do is set up a definition of a different kind of degree. It's designed specifically to address the skills gap that was identified in Shadbolt. More about that in a moment. And it does that by focusing not on knowledge and insight to the traditional grounds or the focus of academic degrees, but on competence, being able to do something real in the real world. So it has to be demonstrated through real world experience, and we map it against they like to call it the global SOFIA framework, international SOFIA framework for IT skills, which of course BCS uses and changes slightly to make it into SOFIA Plus, but it's essentially the same framework. And it's intended for practical problem solvers, graduates, rather than those that are necessarily just blue sky theoreticians. So Shadbolt observed, first of all, what drove or triggered the Shadbolt review in the first place was the perceived high unemployment rates of computer science student graduates, which wasn't actually all that high because it was just fewer graduates were going on to higher study than in other engineering subjects. Draw a veil over that. And it collected a lot of evidence from employers, the needs of the digital economy, and so on, and found a very complex interrelationship. It wasn't at all straightforward what the issue really was. And indeed, many employers find that computer science graduates are well prepared for work. That's a key thing. They are good at what they do. And if they're good graduates, and that's the key, they can adapt to the working environment fairly quickly. But there are also commonly reported issues lacking work experience and commercial experience, a lack of soft skills, lack of ability to work successfully in teams, and so on. So the IOC standard, I've mentioned the IOC Institute of Coding, was funded by the Office for Students. One of the things we were trying to do was not trying to replicate what already existed or indeed to replace it. It was supposed to be a complementary route for practically focused degrees, suggesting perhaps some sort of bifurcation within the accreditation process. It was designed collaboratively with industry to meet the reported needs, and the degrees would still have to meet all the statutory benchmarks because they're degrees, otherwise they're not allowed to be. And the aim overall was to achieve professional recognition with an IOC degree, as well as including RIT Tech registration and the educational component of CITP. That was the target, as well, of course, as industry buy-in. But the focus is fundamentally different. It is on the individual student, employability and competence, rather than on bodies of knowledge and theory and the forefront of knowledge and so on. One of the sub-aims was to deliver week one billability, which is a recognition of the concerns of many employers, and particularly the small employers. They don't want to. They haven't got the resources to take on graduates who they have to spend 6 months training. And the other thing we were trying to do is to avoid offering industry yet another academic defined set of programs. So we started by looking at what might be expected. And it's quite interesting looking at things like the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, who have a definition of day one competence. They should be capable and competent basically to practice veterinary medicine at a primary care level, not to be doing it in a room or sitting by someone's side and watching and being coached, but actually to do it, but knowing when to get help from more experienced colleagues. Now that's a whole step up in the competence line from where we are normally. And there are similar statements for other professions, barristers, even for human resources. So what we might be aiming at is something like this: a new graduate who has achieved week one competence should be capable and competent enough to work reproducibly, not just once, not just for a single project to get through their degree, but reproducibly in a specific area of computing on their own, and knowing when to seek direction from more experienced colleagues. Now that's the sort of target. And what we came up with was a meta standard. We haven't defined learning outcomes. We said we've referred everything to the skills framework of SOFIA and done things in terms of that. Subject focus just comes from the instantiation, and you can instantiate from data science, cybersecurity, software development, whatever you like. And what we're trying to do is to find a way of identifying what graduates can do on day one and for what they are equipped to get up to speed quickly. So they can already be useful and they can learn to do something else fairly quickly. So we don't start from bodies of knowledge, existing benchmarks and so on, but we sought to build it around the SOFIA skills framework with a focus on competence rather than just knowledge, and the assessment based primarily on evidence of competence in some form of portfolio. Now, job roles and career paths vary enormously between environments, employer environments. So we're not seeking to tie it to either a single SOFIA skill or a specific skill. Don't care which skills people have demonstrated. And the particular job role is normally going to be combined up to 3 or 4 skills. Details of all of the standard is on the URL at the bottom of the slide on GitHub. What do we mean by competence? We mean being able to do what is needed in an appropriate complex context with minimal routine supervision. You can describe it as flying solo for a customer and being billable rather than having to go out and spend time and effort repairing the damage. Competence became the new focus for ACM Computing Curricula 2020, although there's still some debate, in which I've been involved, on the interpretation of their particular model and whether it might need a bit of tweaking. And of course, there's also an ISO standard for defining competence. In particular, one for computing developers and engineers is ISO 24773, which builds on the earlier standard 17024, but it's basically saying what competency means. And one of the questions we started with was, how close does HE usually get to competence? And if you think about how the university degree progresses, students get to recognize a problem, understand what it is, they know how to deal with it in a safe environment, and they probably have to demonstrate that they can do it at least once in a safe environment where it doesn't really matter if they get it wrong, they might just lose a few marks. They never really get to the stage of conscious competence where they can do things without repeating mistakes, actually be productive, or the unconsciously competent state where they are unconsciously competent state where they can be reproducible, reliable, creative, and so on. And in fact, these levels of the competence fit quite nicely, not against the long used focus of education of Bloom's taxonomy, which is entirely focused on cognitive issues, but actually Simpson's hierarchy, which came out of the same set of committees, where the focus, they call the middle one, that penultimate one would be skill rather than conscious competence, too many words, having two. The focus is on repeated practice. Simpson's hierarchy was first phrased in terms of physical education, where you're learning is basically about muscle memory, but the key is about repeated practice. And this repeated practice was actually taken up also by Miller in his 1990 hierarchy for assessing assessment in medical disciplines, assessment of competence in medical disciplines. Miller's hierarchy is actually an interesting blend of the cognitive, Bloom at the first two levels, moving on to the something much closer to Simpson for the top two levels, where again, repetition and practice really matters. And that is one of the key distinguishing features in an IOC degree. Now, most of members of this group are relatively familiar with what's in SOFIA, SOFIA Plus. This is just a version, it was a few additional details. But some of the key features, first of all, the target diagram on the right-hand side. SOFIA addresses a large range of activities ranging from acquiring people, that is appointments, assessing their performance, analysing how well you're doing, and so on. Complete life cycle of activities. But it's developed not by academics, but by users, employers, for the benefit of users. It has global usage, over 180 countries, and it is becoming a common language for skills descriptions. Often used to define roles, used for matching candidates to roles and so on, used for identifying development paths, used in the BCS for identifying whether someone is actually working at the right sort of level of responsibility for chartered status. And it describes three facets: what people should be able to do, the skill, the complexity of the context in which they're performing that skill, and how autonomous they should be. And that last group is captured by the responsibility characteristics. The actual framework in version 8, which is going to be published next week on the 28th, divides the IT domain into 120 skills, with a number of categories and subcategories and so on, but it tries to cover everything that is important within the IT sphere. It describes skills at up to 7 levels of complexity and autonomy, but not all skills are described at all levels. So, for example, security strategy may not be defined for starting level employees. And one important point which I emphasize, the skill descriptions are exemplars. These are the activities which are examples of the things you should be doing. They are not checklists. You don't have to be doing absolutely everything, one of them, all the time to be competent. That's a key difference from, for example, the tech partnership approach to degree accreditation. 7 levels are characterized by the generic attributes we'll look at in a moment. And they start with follow, that's the newly untrained appointee. You will recognize, ensure and advise. Level 5 is the one that's used for chartered status in BCS. Level 7 for fellowship. A graduate would expect to be coming out and be doing something at level 3, apply. They've learned things, they're competent to do them, they can apply them. Go on a bit and develop to become team leaders, to be enabling, and so on. So looking at some of those responsibility characteristics, and these are taken from the beta version of SOFIA 8. Obvious soft skills, interacting and influencing with colleagues, contact with customers, suppliers and partners, may oversee others or make decisions which impact on their work, user and customer needs, understanding and collaborating on an analysis of those, contributes fully to the work of teams. All very important soft skills stuff, which, to be honest, a lot of universities in a university environment have some difficulty developing. Complexity, just sort of said, it's a range of work, sometimes complex and non-routine. This is for someone who is applying a skill. They know how to do it. They should be competent. And they apply and contribute to creative thinking or find new ways to complete tasks. So they're not just mechanical robots, they're actually thinking as well. One of the other categories, business skills, I've not touched on the knowledge or the autonomy areas. Business skills, communication skills, effectively applies appropriate methods, tools and applications. They're doing sensible things properly, demonstrating judgment and a systematic approach. The digital skills always comes in because, well, never mind, it's there. Subheading on learning and professional development, taking the initiative to develop their own knowledge and skills, so they're taken responsibility for CPD. And security, privacy and ethics. Ethics appears in version 8 much more explicitly than it did in version 7, and they're expected to be demonstrating appropriate working practices there. And looking at a sample skill, this one's content authoring, so someone that's starting off to develop websites or whatever, or documentation. Obvious tasks they should be doing, but it isn't just writing, it is making informed decisions, it's about clarifying the requirements, and it's producing or ensuring accuracy, currency, and relevance. And all of these sorts of things, and this is the sort of level at which we'd expect someone perhaps who has specialized in web development to be working in developing the content. So what is the standard? Well, for a single honours degree, what we proposed was that graduates could demonstrate all of the generic responsibility characteristics defined for level 3. Proficiency or competence, and proficiency or competence, the difference is just how much of the list of activities they are doing have demonstrated more than once over an extended period, in at least one relevant skill at level 3. Knowledge to underpin one skill at the next level up, and knowledge to underpin at least 3 other severe skills at level 3. So they have knowledge, they have demonstrated proficiency or competence, and they have demonstrated all the soft skills and responsibility characteristics. And there was also, because it wasn't in version 7 as clear as it might have been, demonstrate explicit understanding and engagement with the LSEPIs, the legal, social, ethical and professional issues, including sustainability, including diversity and inclusion, and both of those are quite big in APEC 4, if I understand it correctly. You can then demonstrate their achievements, not necessarily just as a transcript of how many marks they got on a particular module, which may or may not mean anything to the employer, but a set of badges. And a guy might come out with or gal or whatever might come out with a program having demonstrated incompetence in programming at level 4. In fact, release management at level 3, having competence, a couple of other competence ones at the bottom there, project office, that's the mechanics of project management. And if I could remember what INCA stood for, content authoring at level 2, and then knowledge to underpin a whole load of others. And the whole point is that all of these can be accumulated through a program. For the program website, we developed a curriculum that would deliver all of these, in fact, and it just looks just like a standard academic program, except it has a whole load of opportunities for real-world practice built in as well. So for a competency badge, what do they need? Well, they need to have demonstrated the generic responsibility characteristics. They need to have the knowledge to underpin it. And then they need to have job experience applying that knowledge. The ISO 24773 defines the skill, having a skill as application of knowledge, and we want a repeated application of knowledge in the real world, in a real world context. They need all of those. And they also need to show some leadership skills and experience, because those are part of the generic responsibility characteristics. The badges that might be available for SOFIA version 7, available from our Knowledge Media Institute site. Now, we know that degrees in England have to meet a range of outcomes. Alastair already mentioned this. I missed out a query, but they're all in there. And the generic responsibility characteristics for SOFIA Level 3 address virtually all of those generic requirements of the QA subject benchmark statements and the Framework for Higher Education Qualifications outcome statement, and the equivalent for Scotland, and the technical characteristics follow from almost any technical instantiation. So it covers all of the things that are caught in the those requirements frameworks, and they also cover many of those for BCS CITP accreditation. We did a mapping exercise to demonstrate this. There is direct alignment between the IOC competence and RITC competencies, so that is just picking up on what BCS already does for placements, and there's a similar alignment for master standards. And just to show you very quickly, do not try and read this unless you've got very good eyes. The mapping from level 3 generic responsibility characteristics to FHE outcomes, well, to expand it a bit, you've got these are the outcomes. You see the blue ones are satisfied if you have appropriate technical content. The red ones are not addressed by the generic characteristics because they're academic things. Particular aspects of current research, advanced scholarship in the discipline, uncertainty, ambiguity, and limits of knowledge, and so on. And some of them are partly met, but they are also all met by the time you put some technical stuff in there as well. Kevin.
Thank you very much, David. So this is just to finish off on this. The Institute of Coding approach does help us see very much how graduates can be seen as coming in with the right knowledge and experience. Hiring people with the right competence is really difficult to do, and I know as an employer I'm always looking for people that I can just look at their CV and know what they're capable of doing. And the IOC accreditation does give us a way of having some confidence that when you're hiring a graduate, that they're actually going to come in with that week one billability, that conscious competence. And we're trying to, I think with the IOC standard, trying to bring the standard and bring industry participation and the academic world closer together. And it formalizes the whole work relationship, and the competence is what we're looking for. We need to know that somebody's coming in with the right skills. Actually, one of the questions that's come in relates very much to this. I've been one of the industry members on the accreditation panel. We've had a number of industrial partners involved in it. It works really well. Yes. It's also had Alastair from the BCS Academy of Computing involved in it, and all of the research and work that's been done has been published. So, is there one more slide, David?
No, that's it. Okay, if there's an accreditation process, very quickly, just try and wrap up to get to the last slide. Require that a program to be accredited against the IOC standard has to give opportunities for real world experience, and integrated, not supplementary. Too many work placements are just add-ons rather than being part of the program. It's curriculum independent. We don't specify which skills and which competence must be demonstrated. What we're interested in is the assessment of an HEI's ability to assess competence and award competence badges, which might be allowed outside an accredited program then, for example, for CPD or micro-credentials, although they're not very micro. Raises the level of abstraction for accreditation. The assessment of technical achievements of a student on a placement or whatever is based on a portfolio of evidence. It's criterion based, it's reproducible, and evidence of successful completion of 50 to 85% of the components more than once over an extended period. More than 50% gives them proficiency, more than 85% gives them competency. And they've got to demonstrate that an HEI must demonstrate their approach is equivalent to the IOCs. And a similar process for responsibility characteristics, counting instances in the portfolio, the demonstration of a subset of the general responsibility characteristics. Alastair's spoken about the current thing, and I'll emphasise that there is an enduring need for computer science graduates, as noted by Shadbolt. This is something that's complementary. Takeaways: new approach to accrediting degree programs with a focus on competencies rather than just academic knowledge and skills. It complements the current academic accreditation and addresses deployability issues head on. If it's underpinned by an appropriate skills framework, can meet the required frameworks and benchmarks, and it's ready configurable from anything from level 4 to level 7 in the NQF, possibly higher. Raises level of abstraction for accreditation and opens the door to micro credentials for CPD. I got to the end. There is a Mentimeter quiz if anyone would like to, please fill it in. It's only half a dozen questions. Go to www.menti.com and that is the access code 55780305. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you both for covering a huge amount of content in the time that we've had. I hope you don't mind, we've got a couple of questions that have come in, be able to address them. Fairly brief one for you, Alastair, just to begin with. What's the timescale for operationalising the transformation to AHEP4?
It started, and it's you know, that institutions can start to request to use AHEP4, but we're really rolling that out over the autumn period. We have to have it in place by the end of the year.
Thanks. Second question. I'm a tester and a member of SIG-IST. This year, there's been discussion in the testing community about how few degrees include testing. Is there a way we can take these concerns into the review of BCS accreditation? And I guess that could be echoed for a number of specialist areas. It's like everyone wants to have their role. I can see how it fits with the Institute of Coding model with the SOFIA sort of alignment to a particular competence area. But Alastair, how do you address that from the BCS accreditation?
I mean, you're quite right, you know, and the BCS criteria for accreditation isn't to look at every single potential subject area of interest. You know, that's not what it's about. However, if testing, and I know testing is in the benchmark, then there's an expectation that everything that's in the benchmark is covered to a greater or less extent in the provision that an HEI would put forward. You know, I'll give you an example. Recently, in the last couple of years, we added in a criteria around cybersecurity because we argued that every single computing degree, no matter what flavour, whether it's, you know, like a business degree, whether it's a games degree, or should have cybersecurity in it. Now, I know that those of you who are in the testing community would argue that, you know, every bit of software should be tested properly, and if we tested it properly, then we wouldn't be in the situation we are with all the various examples of major systems going wrong. So, you know, I mean, it's not there at the minute, not explicitly. Implicitly, there's an expectation that any design process, whether it's systems design or program design, has appropriate testing included in it. So it sounds a bit of a fluffed answer. It is, because you know, we can't put every single criteria into that program accreditation.
Yeah, thank you. Questions coming for David. The nursing profession requires a large amount of supervised hands-on nursing experience for students with sign-off of demonstrated capabilities. Is this going to be needed in a student's industry engagement to show competence? If so, would this come from sandwich courses or apprenticeship placements or ...
Okay, there's a slight difference in that we're looking for students to accumulate a portfolio which is then validated en bloc by their supervisor to say, basically, the contents are accurate. They did actually do this. They got it right. They got it, or they did get it right. They did get it wrong. Rather than individual things being signed off, it's a high level treatment. But yes, it will need real world experience. You cannot demonstrate competence in the lab. Well, you can if you're doing a lab technician, but you can't demonstrate it outside the real world. The context in which you perform the various tasks has to be real. An example I use quite often, which people are getting bored with, is when I play my organ with my headphones on, I can play beautifully. All the notes are in the right place. As soon as I take the headphones off and other people can hear, everything moves and I get everything wrong. That's the difference between capability, you can do it once, and competence, so you can do it reproducibly. And you have to do that in the real world.
Yeah, the reproducibility, absolutely. So I'm going to running slightly over our advertised time, but I've got to ask a question from an employer's perspective. So I'm an employer, I'm looking at a CV. What do I go for? Do I look for BCS accreditation? Do I look for SOFIA skills in the form of badges from the Institute of Coding? Do I look for something from Tech Partnership? Alastair, I'll let you go first. What's the thing that's going to give me confidence that I'm employing somebody who is ready to go?
You'd expect me to say an appropriately accredited degree from the BCS.
David?
That's what it says on the tin.
I would say it depends what you're looking for. I'd emphasize again that Shadbolt said that there is strong continuing demand for good graduates from traditional academic degrees. There is also evidence that workplace experience in placements or any other mechanism is very highly valued by employers. And it depends whether you want someone that's going to hit the ground running, able to do things, and if possible has demonstrated it and is certified, or whether you want someone who is going to be a blue skies thinker and invent the next Zoom.
So pick the program that fits what you're looking for. Right. I'd like to say a huge thank you to both of you. I know we have covered a huge amount tonight, but thank you both. It's great to see what BCS is doing, but it's also really good to see what other ideas there are around, and I'd love to see some of the IOC work carrying on, being embedded into the wider BCS approach to accreditation. But thank you everyone for joining tonight. Thank you to both of our speakers, and hope that was interesting, informative, and we will have the recording up on the member group site hopefully before the end of the week. So thank you very much everybody, and look forward to seeing you at next month's event.